Hi, this is Reinhard from Everyday Systems. Last episode, I discussed the value of reframing study from a kind of cramming to clear a one-time intellectual obstacle course to a lifelong habit akin to diet or exercise or meditation. I talked about 3 ways to look at this habit: continuous study, improving study, and contemplative study. Establishing the right frame or mindset, the cognitive part of a kind of CBT. Hopefully you were intrigued, if not convinced. If you're still listening, I'll assume so. So what do you actually do to make the study habit a behavioral reality? What are your concrete practices? That's what I'm going to talk about today. The tools and techniques to use, and maybe even more important, how to make the time to use them. Because as with physical exercise or meditation, much of the problem of making study a habit is carving out the time. And we can use some of the same approaches. Long-time listeners will notice some previously discussed everyday systems making cameo appearances here. There are 3 kinds of active time relevant to the study habit: dedicated blocks of time, opportunistic scraps of time, and shareable time. Then there's a 4th kind of time, something I call eureka time, which isn't something you actively engage in, but happens as a kind of byproduct of good active study time. Dedicated blocks of time are what we're most familiar with when we think of study. We may not have figured out how to actually carve out this time or how to utilize it well, but it's the image we have in our heads, hitting the books. And maybe this is why study in general seems so daunting, because who has time for anything? Dedicated time is when you give total focus to your study, doing nothing else. So it's a precious commodity. Dedicated time for study means less dedicated time for other things. So you have to ration it very carefully and be very strategic in how you use it. It's the hardest time to carve out, and you feel the worst when you squander it. So how do you do this? How do you carve out this most precious time? 1. Time box lord, i.e., setting a timer for a daily, relatively small, predetermined regular length of time to force focus and keep from panicking about the opportunity cost of how much time you're taking from other tasks. You may have heard of the Pomodoro technique. It's a similar idea, except I'd say keep the time boxes very small, much smaller than the Pomodoro time, especially to begin with. The important thing is to make it a regular daily or week daily habit. N and S days can be a useful structure here as well. Track the days you've done this on a personal punch card and or on your life log spreadsheet or on a physical paper calendar, however you like to track things. Regular application builds habit. Habit makes regular application easier, with study just as with diet and exercise. And even a small amount of regular, active, dedicated study time primes the mind for eureka time, which I'll discuss in a bit. In fact, even a laughably short amount of active time, dedicated active time, gives you that bonus eureka time. It's like those matching donations that charities do. 2. Second way to help carve out this dedicated time. Find a way to love, or at least like, the subject or material. The easiest way to do this is to study something you already love or are interested in. And by all means, do this if you can. But sometimes this isn't possible. Sometimes we have to study unlovable, or at least, for the present, unloved subjects. If you can't love the subject right off the bat, or ever, start by loving the process, or deciding to be open to the possibility of loving the process. I'll talk about a particular lovable process in a moment, but if you find you don't love that one, keep experimenting until you find one you do. 3. Third way to carve out the dedicated time. Be conscious of how you relate your dedicated study time to the other kinds of study time, how you tie them all together. I mentioned the Eureka Time already, but there's a tool called Anki, a flashcard app, which I'll describe in a moment, that lets you connect opportunistic and shareable time as well, making all three more valuable and boosting your motivation to follow through with making this most expensive dedicated time. Opportunistic scraps of time, the second kind of active study time. These are times when you're waiting in line for something, when you're between activities that require sustained attention, and you'd normally likely just be killing time on your phone. It's about reclaiming all those few little minutes. Fortunately / unfortunately, most of us kill a lot of time on our phones, so there's a lot of opportunity for reclamation. The key for me in reclaiming these opportunistic scraps of time is again that flashcard I mentioned, Anki, A-N-K-I. I'll talk more about the specifics of Anki and my particular approach to it shortly, which is a bit different than most other approaches floating around on the web. But for now, I'll note just one beautiful thing about the Anki in the scraps of time habit. When you use it, you not only introduce a good habit, you displace a bad habit. Instead of compulsively scrolling through envy-inspiring social media or sensationalist news or playing addictive video games, activities that stress or harm us or at least make us feel gross, we learn something. We feed our minds, and if our Anki cards are really good, maybe even our souls. And no one around us has to be the wiser for it. It looks like we're killing time just like everyone else. No grandstanding required. There's an Emerson quote I love, as if you could kill time without injuring eternity. With a habit of viewing Anki flashcards, you jujitsu your compulsion to diddle with your phone at every interval into something positive. It's like phone methadone, except even better, because your displacement activity is actually of value. Shareable time, the third and last kind of active study time, is when you're primarily focused on another activity, but it doesn't engage all of your senses or attention. For example, some manual task that leaves your mind and ears free, like doing the dishes or vacuuming, or perhaps even also your eyes free, like shovel glove or some other form of exercise. It's not multitasking, which is almost a pejorative term these days, and probably rightly so. Multitasking is the hubristic attempt to give conscious attention to more than one thing at once, usually resulting in insufficient attention being given to any one of them. Exploiting shareable time, by contrast, is when you really have multiple modes of attention to give that don't compete with each other, that might even complement each other. Case in point, I do the dishes better when I'm listening to an audiobook because I'm not bored and impatient, and I listen to the audiobook more attentively because I don't feel anxious about not being productive. My hands are doing something indisputably useful, and that leaves my mind free to pay better attention to the book. Autodidact, systematically listening to somehow edifying audiobooks or courses, is my tool of choice for most shareable time. Housework, driving, walking, even waiting if I'm through with my daily Anki card review. And I expand autodidact to what I guess I could call AV didact for when I'm doing shovel glove, because then I have my eyes free as well. Instead of watching some goofy exercise video, I infotain myself or aestheticize, usually by watching German movies or news or Netflix series or YouTube. It's win-win-win. I get my exercise, I get my entertainment or intellectual or aesthetic stimulation of the sort, and I practice my German all at the same time. Practical how-to videos are great to throw in the mix for foreign language learning, if this is something you're interested in. Whenever I have to figure out something, like how to explain parallel parking to my teenage daughter, or how to clean an electric razor, or eat a pomegranate, or cook goulash, or be less terrible at chess, I'll look on YouTube for German how-to videos to watch while I exercise. My curiosity or need makes me pay more careful attention, so I learn better German while I'm learning the solution to my problem, while exercising. You see, most other self-help gurus content themselves with win-win solutions. I'm giving you win-win-win. Eureka time is bonus. It's when your mind, primed by good active study, all of its own, when you're engaged in some unrelated task, returns to the subject you're studying, and without your having to force anything, you see relationships you hadn't before. Insights and connections just flash into your head. This most reliably happens for me in the shower, so I sometimes think of it as shower time, which is highly appropriate given the origin of the word eureka, or at least the origin of us knowing about this word. Archimedes shouting in the bathtub as the theory of displacement came to him in ancient Greece. Eureka time isn't something you can schedule directly. It's something you get as a byproduct or after effect of the other active study times. But you can make room for it, beyond showering a lot, by other intentional activities. Walking, aka urban ranger, for example, is also a good setting for Eureka time, and something you can try to engineer more of into your life, with other benefits as well. So you can't force Eureka time, but you can prep for it, and you can make room for it. I keep mentioning the flashcard system Anki as a key element in tying all these kinds of study time together. There are other ways you could do this without this particular app, but Anki has a lot of really nice qualities, and because it's what I actually do, and we want to get beyond the theoretical in this episode, I'm going to describe it and my approach to it specifically. If another app or mechanism, maybe analog, paper index-based, card-based flashcard system versus a digital system appeals to you more, you can probably translate or port the Anki-based approach I describe here, but I'm not going to get into that now. Anki, which comes from the Japanese word from memorization, I think, is a flashcard program you can run on your desktop computer, Mac, Windows, Linux, Chromebook even, and also on your phone, iPhone, Android, iPad. The base Anki system is open source, meaning developers from around the world volunteer to write and maintain its source code. There's no evil spying corporation behind it. And it's free, except on iOS devices, where it costs a one-time $25, which seems hefty, but given its really life-altering potential, is really dirt cheap. And I'm happy to support the work of the volunteers on this great community project that I benefit so much from. But again, you can trial it on your computer for free before you splurge for the iPhone app. The key concept behind Anki is its spaced repetition algorithm. This means it keeps track of how often you mark that you got a card right or wrong, and it'll adjust how frequently it shows you that card again based on research into the optimal amount of forgetting time that's helpful for long-term retention. In other words, you don't waste your time reviewing cards you already clearly know. The system will wait to show you those cards again until it thinks you're about to forget them, or maybe have just barely forgotten. And apparently that timing, that waiting till you've just about forgotten something, makes it sink into your brain more deeply. It's not perfect, but it's way more efficient than just stupidly reviewing everything hard and easy at the same level all the time. It also means you can build gigantic decks of flashcards over time without worrying about manually culling all those easy cards once you've mastered them, because the spaced repetition algorithm automatically cuts through the clutter, only showing you the few cards, even in a gigantic deck built up over years, that will be helpful for you to review right now. And those longer spaced reviews ensure that you really deeply learn your cards. After you've gotten a card right enough times, Anki will literally wait years to show it to you again, at which point, maybe it's time. One of the brilliant things about any flashcards, Anki or even paper flashcards, is that they tap into something called active recall. The idea is when you take a test, it's not just about measuring or assessing what you know, like some mind reader, but by prompting you to remember, the process actually helps you learn. When you read or listen to a lecture, it's passive. But the act of reaching into your brain to fish out a fact or a formula to solve a problem strengthens your learning in a powerful way. What's more, we think we hate tests, but that's because of the pressure and judgment around them. The activity itself, we kind of love, right? Think quiz shows and trivia night. We love that stuff. It's a game. You don't have to gamify learning like this because it's already a game. It's fun. Remember how I said one of the keys to motivating yourself to do dedicated study time is loving the process? Now you might think, aren't flashcards just for cramming, right? The opposite of the study habit. They certainly can be. They're good for that too. And Anki is a tool of choice among med school students and Jeopardy contestants and others who need to regurgitate vast amount of information for various intellectual obstacle courses. But because of its spaced repetition algorithm, Anki really shines when you're trying to absorb knowledge long term. Of course, you have to combine that capability with being careful about what you're absorbing to begin with, what you're putting into your cards. Is it trivia, or is it something really useful or important or delightful to you? So card creation is key. You can download community-made decks and contribute your own to the community, but to really get the most out of Anki, making your own personalized cards is key, because you're going to spend way more time reviewing each card than making it. So it's worth investing some thoughtfulness in card creation. You don't want to be reviewing mediocre cards over and over again for years, even if only rarely because of the algorithm. It's a long-term relationship you're getting into with each card. Yes, you can manually cull cards if they get irritating, and I sometimes do. But again, even so, you're likely to have reviewed them many, many times before that happens, before you make that painful decision. Thoughtfulness in card creation doesn't mean a vast amount of time or effort. It doesn't have to. Anki supports images, sounds, reversible two-way cards. You can make crazy sophisticated cards. But one of my favorite Anki features is something called cloze deletion cards. C-L-O-Z-E. I should look up what the story is behind that crazy word, but I'm afraid I haven't yet. This lets you input a bunch of text and then blank out certain words or sections as prompts. This lets you take a text you're studying, say foreign language material or a poem or a technical documentation, and quickly make high quality cards from this material. You can add multiple cloze deletions per card, and Anki will prompt you separately for each one, effectively creating multiple cards from one. One out of each blanked out section. In Anki terminology, multiple notes per card. So you can make a lot of notes very quickly without much work. This technique is great for foreign languages because it lets you stay in the target language, which helps the brain switch over and think in that language and learn more deeply. You have to guess the blanked out word or section from context rather than translate from English. It's also great for focusing in on just the tricky bits in a poem or technical document. It's also great for taking a block of text that you don't necessarily want to memorize verbatim and giving you a way to review it periodically. Having to guess that one missing bit makes you re-engage with the entire larger passage a little more actively than just rereading it would. It gives you an active hook into the larger context or concept. I've been very surprised at how good my memory is in filling these gaps and then dragging the larger context along. I do this for larger passages that have impressed me in one way or another that I want to call to mind periodically. By blanking out a few words in Anki, I give myself a time-efficient mechanism to periodically, actively re-engage with large, sophisticated ideas and keep them fresh. The new Dune movie is out now, and though I haven't seen it, I'm a big fan of the book, and I imagine these closed deletions as being like the hooks that the Fremen dig into the giant sandworms to control and ride them. Sometimes I do memorize larger passages verbatim, poems, for example, or passages from Shakespeare or Goethe or the Bible. Not for any useful instrumental purpose, but because I love them. Contemplative study. One of the reasons I've gotten into this is that I've been impressed, really moved to see how over these last few hard years with my declining parents, some of the last happy things they could remember were these long passages of Schiller and Goethe that were drummed into them during their youth, and to see how moved they were by these recollections. When memorizing something longer like this, I'll start by making a card for the whole passage. That card will take a while to master. So in parallel, as I'm wrestling with it, usually a week or two into this wrestling, I'll make closed deletion cards for the bits I find are giving me particular trouble. 90 to 95% of a poem or passage usually come pretty easily. It's those tricky parts that need to be honed in on to make the whole thing come. You can edit Anki cards on your phone as you're reviewing them. It's a bit awkward though, so I keep my phone edits minimal. So what I'll do is, on my phone, as I'm struggling with the larger poem or passage to memorize, I'll bold, then also italicize, then also underline the bits I keep getting wrong, right? So I get something wrong a lot, it's bolded, italicized, and underlined. Later, during dedicated study time on my computer, when I can edit and create cards more efficiently, I'll turn those marked up tricky spots into proper, separate, closed deletion cards, prioritizing the trickiest, multiply marked up ones. So that's one thing I do with my dedicated blocks of time. Make new Anki cards. I review during scraps, but I create them during dedicated time. Another thing I'll do during dedicated time is read, usually with a timer set, time box lowered, and a pen in hand to mark up passages for potential Ankification. When I read a book properly, it's a 4-stage process. First, I listen to the audiobook version during shareable time. If the book really resonates, I might select it for rereading on paper during dedicated blocks of time, marking up sections for Ankification. Then, I'll do a third pass to turn some of those marked up passages into Anki cards for review during scraps of time. Finally, I review those Anki cards during scraps of time. Because dedicated time is such a rare commodity, very few books get this full 4-stage treatment. Listen, read, Ankify, review. If I'm listening to an audiobook I love, but despair of finding the time to process fully like this, I'll do my best to note selected passages as I'm listening for Ankification later. Even if I can only manage to get a handful of choice passages into Anki as closed deletions, those few little hooks, like the Fremen's hooks into the sandworms, are quite effective at bringing back something of the larger work when I review them, so the book doesn't just vanish from my mind the way it might have otherwise. I do a similar thing with the videos I watch during my Shovel Glove AV didact. If I catch a phrase that intrigues me, say a mind-blowing Schopenhauer quote in Netflix series Dark, or the surprising term for what bishops are called in German in a YouTube how-to chess video, I'll pause and jot it down for Ankification later. It's important that you love your cards, or at least that you think you might come to love them. They should be funny or provocative or moving or inspiring or beautiful. Not every card, but enough of them, so that when you're reviewing them, you are putting yourself in contact with something intrinsically good, something worth spending time with, even apart from any instrumental goal. Not killing time, but the opposite. Even if you're studying something mundane, like German grammar, take a passage that has literary or at least comic merit and add closed deletions for the grammatically tricky bits. Learn German noun declensions with Goethe and Kafka. There's no killing time with those guys, even if all you're blanking out is der, die, das. All of these study activities I've discussed so far are solo study. But there's another mode of study that's also quite important. Study with friends, or comrades in learning, social study. This is dedicated study time, already a rare commodity, made even rarer and more difficult to engineer by the difficulty of coordinating with other human beings and their dedicated time. But it's abundantly worth it to make sure it happens at least sometimes. It's often said that you don't really know something unless you can explain it to someone else. And that's tough to do without someone else. Any kind of discussion back and forth will reveal and shake up misunderstandings and jostle you into deeper understanding. It's an even richer form of active recall than flashcards. Courses, physical or online with discussion groups, can be a useful social study context for many people. But what I love best is the good old-fashioned book club. It's more intimate, more equal. There's no boss professor lording it over the rest of the class. And besides the learning aspect, there's the friendship aspect. You're furthering both your study and your human relationships. Book clubs don't have to be big. My two most durable book club type arrangements have been with one other person and the other with two other people. They're more like book partnerships. In fact, I think it's better when they're really small. Then it's more intimate. You can speak your mind more freely, and you also have fewer people to negotiate with about what to read or study. A study club or partnership can be useful for any of the three kinds of study habit study, but it's particularly good when it comes to contemplative or improving study. It helps with the study, it adds accountability to help motivate you, and deepens your understanding and retention of the subject because you form more and different connections through talking through the material with another human being. And like contemplative study, it's a good in itself. It strengthens and deepens the friendship. And you can extend the book club idea to any kind of study club. Say, take an online course together, form a course club. Especially if your comrades in learning are real friends. It can sustain or even deepen a friendship to have a common project like this and wrestle with an engaging, challenging topic. And the intimate size of the group means you're less likely to get distracted by posturing and trying to impress people and feeling insecure about what you don't know. Now, very little of your study habit time will likely be this most precious, dedicated, social study time. But I do think it's important to squeeze in what little you can. It's like some rare but vital nutrient for our intellectual digestive system. There's a beautiful C.S. Lewis quote that comes to mind. Friendship is unnecessary, like philosophy, like art. It has no survival value. Rather, it's one of those things which give value to survival. So, when you combine contemplative study with friendship, you get something doubly unnecessary in this good C.S. Lewis way, each reinforcing the other. Another multi-level win for study. The last study habit related issue, which I'm not going to have time to go into today, I think this may be already the longest episode I've ever done, but I want to at least briefly mention it now because it is important, maybe even the most important. In fact, it's the question of importance itself, the question of what to study. How do you decide that? Because no matter how many scraps of time we reclaim and time boxes and multitaskings we engineer, life is only so long. There is a finite amount of time to box and reclaim. I've talked before about the problem of infinite work. Well, there's also the problem of infinite study. We could work forever and still not get all our work done, and we could study forever and still not learn everything worth learning. On one level, that's a problem, and it's a problem very much related to infinite work, as I hope to examine in a future episode. But on another level, if you look at it in the right way, it's kind of wonderful and inspiring. I mentioned last episode that rabbinical saying, the study of Torah is equal to them all. Well, I'll close out with another beautiful rabbinical image, not unrelated. In some conceptions of the afterlife, the world to come, the blessed souls are seen as studying Torah forever. That's their reward. They get to eternally study this infinitely rich and deep and beautiful thing. There's no rush. There's no goal beyond it. As you remember, the study of Torah is equal to them all. I love this image, and I love that you can get started with it right now. I could probably go on for quite a bit more about the study habit, and I imagine my approaches will change over time as I keep wrestling with it, especially if I get to do it for eternity. But the main thing is that I continue to wrestle with it, and at this point, I feel pretty confident that I will. That's all for now. I hope this was helpful, or at least thought-provoking. Thanks for listening.